I am incredibly excited to be here this evening with this phenomenal group of people to have some really important conversations. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Lorraine Marr, founder of I Am Irish, and I'm delighted to bring this group of people from around the world tonight to have these conversations with you. If you have got any questions, please do pop them into the chat and we'll see if we can answer as many questions as we possibly can. And don't forget, tomorrow is Mixed Race Irish Day. So please do tweet, and it happens to be the birthday of an incredible man, Jude Hughes, who's going to be 80. Jude was born and grew up in Ireland. So for anybody across the world that thinks that Black people are new in Ireland, we've been there for a really long time. Without further ado, I'm going to hand over. Fiona, over to you.
Thanks, Lorraine. Thanks for having us. And thank you again for putting this together so we can celebrate our Irish ancestry. I'm very excited about today's panel. I am surrounded by a group of amazing humans. We are spread across the globe, but the one thing that we have in common is we have a connection to Ireland. I myself, I am a Black biracial woman living outside of Chicago. I identify as Black and biracial, but I am Irish and Nigerian. That is my culture. I have an Irish mother, amazing mother, and a Nigerian father who's passed away recently. One of the things that I will say about this panel in general is that we want to have a discussion about, you know, when you leave Ireland, how does that affect how you see yourself in the world as an Irish person of dual ancestry or mixed race? And so for me, I will say personally, my first experience of really realizing that my Irish ancestry was a little bit different was when I moved to the US and people asked me, what are you? And I really did not know what that question meant. I was like, I'm a human, I am Irish. But I then quickly discovered it meant, are you Black or are you white? So I think we've all had different experiences, but I think today will be a good discussion for us to talk about what those experiences mean to us and how they connect us to our stories. And so without further ado, I am going to introduce the rest of the panel and kind of pass it to you guys to share a little bit about yourselves and just give, you know, a quick introduction of who you are and what is your story and your connection to Ireland. Christian, why don't you go first?
Yeah, sure. Hi, my name is Christian Bolden. I am based in Washington, D.C. I'm here. I'm with an organization, the African American Irish Diaspora Network. Our mission is to foster relationships between African Americans and Ireland through a shared heritage and culture. And so we're kind of creating a framework for people to strengthen their identity and connection to and with the Irish diaspora, engaging with both African American and Irish cultures, businesses, and kind of communicating with one another and providing opportunities for each community. And so I'm excited to be here and looking forward to the dialogue.
Awesome, thanks, Christian. Leon, why don't you go next?
Sure, thanks so much, Fiona. And can I just say it's an absolute pleasure to be here speaking with such an incredible panel. So look, my name is Leon Diop. I'm mixed race Irish and Senegalese. I'm currently based in Dublin. I was born and bred in Tala in Dublin, which was, I suppose, an incredible place to grow up. It was quite diverse as I was growing up, so I did get to see some similar faces around me. I faced a good bit of racism though, still growing up in Ireland, as we were relatively new to Ireland. And as I found more and more of those experiences, I decided in I suppose, the last year of my life that I wanted to start an organization that tackled, anti-Black racism and, builds more cohesive communities. So I started an organization called Black and Irish, and we work on a number of different areas of Irish society, like education. We're trying to make our curriculum, our skills curriculum, more inclusive. We work and help with businesses, helping them to become more diverse, more inclusive as well. We talk to politicians, lobby politicians on how they can be more inclusive as well. And yeah, we just do a good bit of work across Ireland. So that's a little bit about me, and delighted to be here.
Awesome, thanks, Leon. And I will give a shout out for you guys. I have been following you guys on Instagram. By trade, I'm a brand strategist and a digital marketer. And so I will say that the stories that you guys tell are really, really important to, the story of being Black in Ireland. So thank you for all the work that you're doing there. Eoin, why don't you take your introduction next, please?
Yeah, no worries. My name's Eoin Heffernan. I'm from Dublin. I'm currently based in Dubai, and I've been involved with I'm Irish for about 4 or 5 years now. So I first got involved, I think, during the second project Lorraine was running, where I submitted a story and I was part of the exhibition. I just found a really great organisation to kind of help you with your identity and figure out who you are. So my father was Nigerian, my mother was Irish. I suppose I was exploring that background throughout my whole life, and then I moved to America in 2016, and that added a whole new kind of level of difficulties and understandings to get to grips with. So it's been a great organisation for helping come to terms with all that.
Great, thanks so much. Nadia, why don't you go next and share a little bit about yourself?
Hey, my name is Nadia Odumosu. I'm based out of the Bay Area. My mother is Irish and my father is Palestinian. They met in Berkeley in the 1980s. And so that's why I have a California accent. And I'm actually the secretary for a new organization called the Irish Diaspora Decolonization Alliance. We just launched in the Bay Area May 1st, so it's very exciting. And we're hoping to provide a home for Irish folks of many different backgrounds united by political, cultural, and social identities, and really trying to create community that is involved around a progressive front of unifying Irish people around progressive politics for equality and also justice wherever we are. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm really happy to be involved in this conversation.
Thanks for sharing, and I love the mission behind that organization. Axa, why don't you share your story with us?
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone. It's so nice listening to all of your stories, and it's so nice to be here as well. So my name's Axa, and my mother is Irish and my dad's Jamaican, and I'm a Londoner, born and bred in London, North London, but I go back to Ireland very regularly and to Jamaica as well, as much as COVID will allow. So I am the Director of Access and Participation at RADA, which is a dramatic arts university to train actors and technical students. And just like what you're all saying about how important representation is, that's something that my career has been very focused on, about how we represent different communities, the African diaspora, and the variety of people, beautiful people we have in this world, along with youth empowerment and engaging young people through the arts. But yeah, happy to be here tonight.
Great. Did I miss anybody there? No, I think we got everybody on introductions. Thank you guys. So really great sharing a little bit about kind of the background. And as the audience can see, we're really sprinkled throughout the globe, which is super exciting just to see in general. When you think about Ireland as a country, there's nothing that you cannot, tell the tale of Irish people without telling the tale of immigration or movement, or people that have just, gone throughout the globe, traveled for many, many reasons. And so in some ways, we represent some history of that, right? At some point, whether it's through our ancestry or through by choice of leaving the country. But when we say that, I think the one thing as people leave or move, or even if they're there, stay, it's the Irish culture or your ancestry is such an important part of your story, in different ways. And so my first question to each of you guys is really, to really hone in on what does your Irish ancestry mean to you? And I'm going to jump back to Axa, if you can give us a little bit of kind of what that really, means to you as you reflect.
I think the two words that come into mind is resistance and resilience. I'm just really thinking about that in terms of the ancestry. My family are laborers, farm workers, and in terms of like the class system, and so I think just the power and the strength that comes in resistance and building and working, and I feel like absolutely overwhelmed with feeling that sometimes on both cultures actually, but yeah, that's what comes to mind.
And then I'm going to kind of dig into that a little bit more, just on a personal level, for you, when you think about, your present day, kind of the result of that, right? You gave that kind of rebellion. What are some of the things that come to mind when you think of, like, how do you even celebrate that ancestors, celebrate that Irish culture? Just curious if you can tell us a bit, of how what that means to you.
Yeah, I think, that's an interesting question. How do we kind of connect that with now? I think my mother and her story comes from a very immediate line of rebellion as well, in terms of how she ended up in London with a Jamaican. So I feel like that recent history is there too. And I think in terms of advocating for people who are oppressed, I feel like I definitely take that rebellion and that resistance into my workplace and into my career and into my life. So yeah, I'd say that those are the more recent kind of connections to the ancestry.
Yeah, I love that. And I love the word rebellion too. I think that's a really powerful word, that when you said that, I really think of a history of Irish people. There's a lot of that. And one of the ways I see it with a lot of the stories we'll hear today is the rebellion through the arts too, right? Because that's also another way to really showcase that rebellion and that connection to Irish culture and ancestry. Leon, what does your Irish ancestry mean to you?
Yeah, so like my Irish ancestry means a lot to me. When you think of what our ancestors endured, what they went through, be it like oppression, famine, mass immigration, we were and still are a very resilient people. We have a very rich culture, which I think is incredible. I love to partake in it. And for me, the only thing that I can think of when I think of like my Irishness is just a really, really deep sense of pride. I have no problem, singing it from the rooftops, especially with a couple of drinks on me, especially then. But it's something that I'm very, happy to talk about. I love talking about Ireland. Like whenever I was abroad, it has obviously not been for quite some time now, but yeah, like Irishness is just it's an incredible thing to have, and it's so unique. And the diaspora should be just so happy to carry that Irishness with them, because it is such a long, rich history. But yeah, to me, I'm so proud to be Irish. It is an incredible feeling.
Okay, and then for future note or future festival, we need to have that sing song. Challenge accepted.
Absolutely.
When in-person events are allowed again.
I'll go bar for bar.
Okay,
I'm ready to go.
Yep. Let's do it. Nadia, how about you? What does your Irish ancestry mean to you?
Well, I think just the way that I look and kind of where I was raised, it wasn't very apparent that I was Irish, just from mom's accent and the way that she looks. Her and I are very different looking. I look much more like my father's family. She is blonde and blue-eyed, and I think most of the time people can really tell the difference here between someone who was British and someone who was Irish or Australian or New Zealand. It just sounded funny. But in terms of what the identity means, it was always centrally important. And I think part of it is both of my parents have experienced dispossession, being Palestinian and Irish, being pushed by different forces, whether it's economic or direct colonialism. And so I think that's very important. I have learned many threads in my life of the way that British colonialism, like literally the Black and Tans going through Coot Hill Cabin, took my grandfather out of his bed in the 1920s, and how 700 of those men who served in the Black and Tans and marauded throughout Ireland actually went to my town in Jaffa and Haifa in Palestine, and very probably also terrorized my grandparents, which I think is an important history because it shows the connections that British colonialism spread so far. And I think it's something that's uniting. Even though Ireland and Palestine are so different, we do have a lot of connections, not just our oppression. Of course, that's one of them. And lastly, I think for me, Ireland's been a real inspiration. And my Irish identity, my Irish family, songs, stories, they've been a real inspiration for me growing up, because it also means that it's a responsibility for us as Irish people to confront oppression and injustice wherever we are. And it's a good segue, I think, for Irish people here in the so-called United States, many of whom are white or white passing, to be able to also revoke white supremacy, while also having to contend with that very real supremacist history that unfortunately Irish people have participated in actively here. So that's just one piece, but I'm very proud to have that identity, and it does mean a lot to me.
Nadia, I just wanted to kind of touch on something you said about, just facing the white supremacy piece of this. And I think that, obviously not to go down a kind of rabbit hole of what that means, but I think it is something that, especially on this type of a panel, that we can really speak on or speak out against from a standpoint of what that means, what we can do, as future generations of really addressing an issue as such. So thank you for touching on that. Eoin, why don't you give us, your perspectives on what your Irish ancestry means to you?
Yeah, it means, I suppose it means everything to me. I see myself as 100% Irish, and I've done a fair bit of traveling around the globe, and like everywhere you go, you get such a warm reception. It's crazy. And what Nadia was saying there about the relationship between Ireland and Palestine, I was viewing apartments here a while ago, and the landlord was from Palestine, and he heard my accent. I love the Irish. I'll give you 15% off the rent straight away. Just because I'm Irish. And then you might be in bars in America and people hear the accent. They kind of look at you, take a second look. You Irish? Yeah, here, let me get you a drink. So that's the type of impact I suppose we have on people. We're a small nation, by numbers, but if you go around the globe to the most remote parts and regions, people will have a story about an Irish person. I'd put one.
So I'm going to dig a little deeper on your response, because I'm curious on where you said, like, you go around the world and the Irish are so kind of loved, which I definitely agree. Have you ever had the opposite effect of that, though, on just physical appearance, saying you're Irish?
Yeah, the whole time. I suppose you get used to it, like that people question you, and I think it's mad because we're so close to London, like Axa's across in London there, and from Dublin to London is an hour by plane, right? If you're black or brown and you're from London and you say I'm from London, people don't even question it or bat an eyelid. When I say I'm from Ireland, people are like, nah, don't believe it, prove it to me. Like, and then for a while I used to try and prove my Irishness to people, and now I'm just like, you know what, if you don't believe it, I don't really care, because right. I know where I'm from, and I don't really care about you.
How do you prove Irish? How would you prove your Irishness?
Tattoo on my ass of a shamrock that I got when I was 17 in Magaluf. So that's my clue, but you can't just whip that out anywhere.
True story. Thanks for sharing that level of expression. We're here for that. We're here for it. Christian, how about you? What does your Irish ancestry mean to you?
Yeah, so I think I'm an interesting kind of case study, because I didn't grow up understanding necessarily my Irish heritage. I kind of did an Ancestry.com thing, which brought it to my attention. So I didn't really grow up with the idea that I had, the Irish in me in a conventional sense. I'm from the deep South from New Orleans, Louisiana, and we're really an amalgamation, historically an amalgamation of a lot of different backgrounds, and heritage is unique in that area, given the French, the French involvement, French Canadian involvement, the Caribbean presence there, on and on, right? So from that standpoint, I think I'm unique in that regard. I think my understanding of Ireland or the Irish was just kind of shaded by the experience, the tumultuous experience between the two communities, the African American community and the Irish community in the United States historically. And it's complex, to say the least. I then studied abroad. So I was in Ireland. I studied, I obtained my master's at Syracuse University, but we had a residency in Ireland. So I spent some time there, significant time there in Dublin and in Cork, interestingly enough. And the embrace was absolutely phenomenal. It blew me away how I was not only embraced personally, but culturally, the nuance. There were a variety of events that occurred, American events that occurred, and it really kind of broadened my horizons with respect to how the rest of the world views the United States. Right, Muhammad Ali just passed, for example, which was a significant, a cultural and political icon of global renown on a scale that I may not have understood. Because when I was coming to Ireland, people, when they hear that I'm from the United States, they just wanted to talk to me about Muhammad Ali, who was like some 50 years older than me. So I didn't really grow up with him in the way that my dad did, where he was that sort of iconic hero for me. But it enabled me to have a conversation with a group of people in a community otherwise that I may not have had. Simultaneously, there were a couple police shootings here, or shootings at the hands of the police, all in Sterling, Rouge, which again is my home state. So people were kind of asking me about that. They were kind of like, "What's going on?" You know, we're obviously we're getting this information through the international press, but you know, you're there locally. You're also an African American. Kind of, what's your, how are you dealing with psychologically? And asking these cultural questions that really made me ask questions about myself, right? And ask about my place not only in the United States but my place in the world, and really just kind of expanded my horizons in terms of understanding that I'm a global citizen, right? And it really opened me up. It really broadened me, and it forced me to grow in an area that I didn't foresee. And frankly, for what it's worth, I come from a relatively international city, right? If you've been to New Orleans, Fiona, we were talking about it. Like, almost as soon as you get off the plane, you realize that my hometown is different from almost every other city in the United States. It's really unique in that way, the cuisine, the architecture, and on and on. And so, unlike almost any other city in the United States. So understanding, having a firm grip on who I am culturally in contrast to the rest of the United States, I really kind of understood that. But what that uniqueness, how that prepared me to embrace the rest of the world and how the world viewed me, I was kind of unaware of that. And visiting Ireland for a significant period of time as I did, really had a profound effect on me in that respect. Yeah.
That's great. Thanks for sharing that, Kristen. I think you touched on something that just was kind of reminding me of my own personal story. My husband is Black, and his ancestors were from obviously Mississippi and obviously West Africa a long time ago. The first time I met some of his family in Mississippi, they looked like my Irish relatives. They had freckles, red hair.
Yeah.
It really actually kind of blew me away. I mean, I know there's a lot of Irish, ancestry and interconnected with the races in the U.S. And so I think that it also is something, I know we're going to talk about that a little bit later as far as hopes for the future, but that is something that, around the globe, for people to kind of recognize just the intermixing of the Irish culture in the U.S. is a pretty big story within itself. Shifting gears a little bit, thank you guys for sharing just kind of the meaningfulness of your Irish ancestry. When we think about words, as a marketer, personally, words have power. And so when you think about how people describe us, people of, Irish ancestry that have dual, racial identity, I want you to think about or kind of describe any experiences that you guys have had of how people, describe who we are around the globe. For my personal experience, I shared a little bit earlier, but, I too was met with a lot of, you don't look Irish. Oh, I didn't know there was Irish Black people. Oh, you're an Irish mutt. And I'm like, whoa, that was probably the most offensive one. But, out of kind of ignorance of understanding that, there are people with multiple, ancestry that live in Ireland. So if you guys could talk a little bit about your own experiences of what those words have been that have been used with you, or even the words that you like to portray for yourself. And so, Nadia, why don't we start with you on that one?
Sure. There was an Irish Crossroads Festival that was hosted by a community center here in San Francisco that's done a lot of really great work. And I was invited to speak about borderlands because my family's from Cavan, from Coot Hill specifically. Most folks live in Dundalk now in County Louth. So in terms of border, there's a lot of connection there. Then, of course, being Palestinian, it's very relevant. And so it was interesting. I was giving the talk and somebody wrote, it was like the first comment underneath it. This was last month. I wrote it down. To describe yourself as Irish is to do a disservice to rational thinking. Which, racism doesn't bother me unless it affects my material conditions, correct? So I was like, oh, that's your miserable attitude. But what was funny about it was it did make me kind of go through what are the ways in which I understand myself. And I think, again, the way I look, I'm kind of a nondescript brown person. But definitely having my name and living in the United States post 9/11, living in a world that was very much affected by the war on terror, I think being Palestinian actually directly impacted me in terms of negative perception more than being Irish. But it still got to me as a person of multiple identities. And I think something that I've learned that seems very true, and I know Fiona said it earlier, but it resonates with me, and I learned it from participating in Indigenous land struggle here in the Bay Area and across the United States. I'm 100% of everything I am. So I'm not half of anything. And I'm not going to use that language that was often used around blood quantum for Black, Indigenous, and Brown people to describe myself. There are no differences or borders. This part of me is Palestinian, this part of me is Irish. It very much informs my identity. So to rehash your question just around some words that I think define us, I do often think of joy. I do often think of what you said in terms of resistance and resilience. Actually, I really loved what you said. And so, it's also part, I think, of educating people who are also Irish and think that, especially here in the proximity to whiteness, think that they have a claim on Irishness, to re-educate them on what it means to be Irish in the 21st century and what it always meant, I think.
I love that. Yeah, and that's really powerful too. I liked your points, Nadia, about not being half of something. I think childhood memory for me and growing up in Dublin was half caste. That was kind of the word that you would hear. It's like half caste, and as a child, you're trying to understand, what does that even mean? I'm a full person. I'm not half of one thing. One thing, despite in regard of your heritage. So yeah, I'd like to ask the same question to Axa, if you can give us your kind of experiences or just perception of words, that have you've heard, or even on the flip side, words that you would like to hear more when we're describing, people of dual Irish ancestry.
Similarly to you, half caste was the hot word in in the household. I think it's a generational thing as well, isn't it? But that's long gone. Thank you. So I think dual heritage, but then dual is like two, and it's like, really, is it only two? Why do we have to pick one or two? I think what one of you was saying about being whole. I really, really like that. But what do we call that? Whole-ish? I don't know. That doesn't even make sense. Scrap that. Delete
you can call it whatever you want. We can start a new word today. We can,
let's do it. Okay, so we've got whole-ish and Yeah, but I think words are changing a lot, and particularly in this last year when we talk about race and the awareness of people now realizing how racist they are and how racist their family are and their colleagues, and the kind of like much more overt discussions around race being a construct. So then we start talking about heritage, and instead of being mixed race, it's dual heritage. So I really like heritage. I like that. That's a positive word for me at the moment. But yeah, I think it's constantly evolving, and I think we need to be ready for that, and open to that. And one thing is last week, it could be something else this week, but that's cool because that's what linguistics is. And as long as we aren't being mean to people and people feel comfortable about their new Holrish terminology.
Started today.
I think we're good.
Yeah, good job out of you, Axa.
I like it. We got to get that started with Webster. Leon, why don't we jump to you and tell us a little bit about your experience with just the words and descriptors that you've experienced, and then also on the flip of what you would like to see more of.
Sure. So yeah, I'll start with some of the negative connotations that are actually still heard in Ireland a good bit today. I still get messages to the Black and Irish page asking, is the term half caste okay to use? And like, of course, I have to just bite my lip and write back an answer that's like trying to be educational and informative. But look, for anyone who's watching that isn't sure, let's just set it straight. It's not okay to use. Caste comes from the term castus in Latin, which means pure. So when you're calling someone half caste, or if you're referring to yourself as half caste, you're referring to yourself as half pure, which is totally wrong. Another term that I've heard quite a bit is mulatto. So mulatto is essentially, it's a term that's used. It's quite a derogatory term that's used for someone who's a mix between black and white. Funnily enough, the only person that uses that towards me is another mixed race person who hounds me for referring to myself as black.
Mariah Carey? Because she referred to herself as mulatto in the early.
Like it's crazy. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't know why people would want to use such self-deprecating language. Do you know what I mean? And like, at least not try and look into what it means and use it so freely. It is such and like, it stems from the word mule, which is a half horse, half donkey. Do you know what I mean? So it's, referring to yourself as, something that is not whole just because you're a mixture of two is, in my opinion, is crazy. So a couple of other things. The term coloured, I've heard that a bit. I actually heard, I was given a radio interview 2 weeks, the day after the conviction of Derek Chauvin. So I was on some airwaves in Ireland, and a radio presenter used the term coloured, and I could have bollocked them on radio, but I know that that's the quickest way to make enemies. So like, look, there's subtle conversation that you can have, educational, inform people, different things like that. From running Black and Irish, I've been sent solicitors' letters, legal challenges. I've been told that I'm committing a genocide against Irish people. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding around it here in Ireland still, and language is very powerful. So you really need to be careful of the language that you use. One aspect of language that I want to briefly discuss, because I know I'm rambling on a bit, is tone. And while they might not say, "Oh, you're not Irish," if you have a negative tone or a tone of doubt when you're speaking to, or someone's explaining to you their heritage, and they say, "Oh, I'm Irish," and you're like, "Are you sure?" That is quite negative to use against someone, because it can make them question themselves. So that's another part of language I just wanted to briefly discuss. But yeah, like language that I've had to use with myself, I'm very open about this, but I had an identity crisis, going through my teen years, and I used to refer to myself as a mule or refer to myself as something that was lesser than. And like I really had to sit down with myself and really try and get those negative thoughts out of my head, because it was making me act in ways that I didn't want to act or think things that I didn't want to think. So I started using terms like hybrid for myself, and you know, other terminology that meant that I was like a strong combination of two things rather than a weaker combination of two things. And that was really important for me. It really helped me get through that tough phase in my mind. So other words I think of, joy. It's fun to have multiple heritages, and be able to move between them and enjoy and immerse yourself in them. So I think that's really important as well.
I was laughing because I recently was reading a book, The Chameleon. It's about, a chameleon that can change into all their settings, And I often say to my kids, you guys are chameleons. You can be, one day you can embrace this part of your culture, next day, it's a magic, So I really like that piece. I do want to ask though, Leon, real quickly though, you may be familiar with the show Mixed-ish. In the US, it's a show about featuring kind of Tracy Ellis Ross, or not featuring her, but her story of growing up, and the show is called Mixed-ish. So what about the word mixed? What are your thoughts there?
Well, I prefer mixed than some of the other language that's been used to me, certainly. But I understand that, as generations go on, certain words will become, defunct, or will start to become negative. Like I don't necessarily have a problem with the word mixed at the moment. I'm sure that may be different for some people, but it really does come down to your personal preference. I refer to myself as mixed race. I refer to myself as mixed heritage as well. I certainly wouldn't use the term half, race or half heritage. And we need to, we need to move on from that. And mixed is the term that I use at the moment. Yeah,
that's great. Owen, what are your thoughts on words that have been used with with your ancestry, and then also like words that you'd would prefer to hear or see?
I'm in agreement with everyone. I absolutely despise the term podcast. I think as Leon said, it's still widely enough used in Ireland, sadly. I'm not like, I think I might have a different angle to come on. So I was adopted, so I was raised by a white Irish family. So the idea of dual heritage doesn't really sit with me, because although I know my father was Nigerian, I only know Irish. So I just kind of see myself as being Irish. I know a lot of people probably don't. But I don't really take too much weight in the terminology of other people. And I also think I have to give it, like, a lot of my friends, when I'm having conversations with them about racism, like, you can see the nervousness and the anxiousness when they go to describe somebody, because they don't know what word to use. And I think Axa was saying that the acceptable definition can change from week to week or person to person. Some people think colored's okay. Some people think it's the worst thing in the world. So I think we have to. There has to be a bit of compassion there, and I also question the need to put a race or I suppose an adjective on people. Like, if somebody wants to do that themselves, if they want to give a bit of their, like, share with people their identity or their history, whatever, dual heritage, that's fine. But I think other people projecting that onto individuals is wrong. That person is mixed, or that person is. At the end of the day, we're all people, and that's what it comes back to.
Yeah, I love that, and I think that really should resonate with everyone, right? Just kind of focusing on like the commonalities. And I think you raised a really good point, Owen, about asking, because I think you're right. Even amongst this panel, we've all got different, life experiences. And I think asking the question, that's one of the things, with people that I've engaged with. It's okay to ask, and, you know, like not be, if you're not comfortable or you don't know, like how do you identify or what do you want me, you know? I think that's how we all learn and kind of evolve as a society. Christian, what are your thoughts on your experience?
This is it's kind of fascinating to discuss, right? These experiences, because I think that there are probably two prisms which we can view this through, right? The first one is oftentimes just linguistically, there's an oversimplification. Like when you're talking to somebody, you don't really have time. Like you're just trying to just chat. Maybe you're having a beer, talking with a friend or whatever. And you don't necessarily have time to say, to give a comprehensive definition of someone, right? So you go and you use a term that you hope that will simplify that, right? And still bridge that communication gap where you can talk to them. And ideally, that term doesn't offend, but you're really just trying to get through the conversation. So you're like, she's mixed. You don't really have time to go, well, she's Irish, Jamaican, she's Canadian, she's British, and she's mixed. You know what I mean? So there's that part of it that I think we often do lazily, right? We lazily, but conveniently nonetheless. So there's that component. And a lot of times, oftentimes we let our friends and family, people that we know that we love and care about, we let them get away with that. And when we're unfamiliar with that person, oftentimes we hold them accountable, right? We're like, what was that? Your mom can say it, right? And it's cool. Like y'all are just having dinner and, you know, she can get away with it. But like somebody who's speaking to you in passing, or if you go out with some buddies and there's a new member to the group and they say something, you're like, what's up with them? Like they're calling me mulatto or mixed, and really they were just trying to, you know, keep the party going or keep the conversation going, and or just, again, lazily, perhaps conveniently, just kind of communicate. But the other part of it is, I think Axa alluded to this a little bit when she was talking about the idea that race is a social construct. Like, and I think oftentimes these things are presented to us politically as a mechanism to classify, and then it seeps into the mainstream. And once it gets into the mainstream, it has a cultural influence, and from there, anything can kind of happen with it, right? So you know, if you get back, you know, obviously I'm in the United States where we talked about, you mentioned it, Fiona, mixed people, right? And where I'm from, we oftentimes deal with colorism, right? The idea that the people of a certain complexion are of less value than other people of a certain complexion here in the United States. And the pedestal that perhaps people of lighter complexion are placed on the United States, particularly in the South, or areas that have dealt with, that aren't as influenced racially with multiple heritages, but have direct connections to like slavery and or the slave trade. You're getting back. So you're talking about the taking of one culture who was enslaved and how they are lightened, if you will, to use a very poor term, but stay with me. I'm actually doing what I'm just described a minute ago, right? But you know, how those people of lighter skin were placed on a pedestal here. We deal with that as well. And so politically, how does that serve you? How are these people framed? How are people framed for political expediency? Well, you know, if you have certain percentage of this amount of blood in you, then you're this, right? So you can't be white because you have too much black blood in you, for instance. You know what I mean? Things like this that were cutting, and well, that's for political expedience to maybe oppress, you know, intentionally or deliberately oppress one group and uplift another group, or perhaps, I guess, perversely, kind of subconsciously alienating one group and uplifting another group, right? So then that seeps into the mainstream. And then how do we deal with that? How do we adjudicate that, you know, as people? And this is the conversations we find ourselves in, right? So, you know, having conversations like this. And so I think it's interesting. I think being intentional about trying to understand people, and sometimes just an acknowledgement. Hey, I don't know. So I'm probably going to say something, a couple of things that could potentially be offensive, but I'm not ill-intentioned. You know what I mean? I'm just saying something on the basis of my experience, of my history, of my understanding of the world. Feel free to enlighten me. I'm not right necessarily, but I am right for me in terms of what I do know and understand. So I think it's really interesting, particularly now where the blowback to globalization has been there has been pushback to immigration, right? So these macro level concepts, that the idea of globalization and the interconnectedness between communities and countries and on, and the idea that people economically are feeling the strain on that, and what do, right? So for political expedience, you have people who are political leaders who go, they're the problem. Those people over there are preventing you from having access to capital and resources and sustenance and these types of things. And so we've seen that over the course of history since the very beginning of time, and we're kind of experiencing that in modern terms. But I think that does shape the dialogue in the mainstream.
I agree. Axa, did you have something you wanted to add?
I was just going to add, it just made me think about your reference point and where you're located. You know, in terms of when we are in the Western world, then that's when we have to work out how we're defined, right? But when we are the majority, and we're thinking about this, as you said, Christian, on a global scale, these definitions have different meaning, and we're not searching for a way to be defined in the same way. So just kind of being constantly aware that this is global and not just Western. And a term we've started using at the university I work at is Black and Global Majority, to just really help us realize that we are the majority, actually. So we've scrapped any minority ethnic terminology, because that's last year, 2020.
I love that. I will say one of the things, though, that it drives me batty from a standpoint of seeing a lowercase b for Black. Please, please, please use uppercase b. So for anybody out there that didn't know and did it, but no shame, but can we please have uppercase b?
Well, that's interesting, Fiona, because it's like, okay, so there's like Black, African American, communities of color, and as communities become more and more homogenous, communities of color in the way that we viewed it, like in the 60s, where what we would call now like the hood or the trap, right? Like these communities that were like that entire area of a city is like the Black side of town, for example, right? And we're seeing less of that through like gentrification and on. But I suppose my point is like, community of color, what does that even mean exactly? You know what I'm saying?
Sure. And I think it's more about just the, to me, like whatever the Black is the culture, like lowercase is like an adjective, so it's just like, so just more of a, kind of a journalism major. I get caught up on those things. Nadia, did you have something you wanted to add there? I saw your hand there.
Yeah, I think something growing up in the Bay in particular, I think it's a hub for a lot of really amazing movements, right? And so we're happy to always, claim the Black Panthers and claim the Brown Beret moving up from LA and the borderlands and different movements. But I think one reaction that I see from the 60s and 70s, which you were just talking about, Christian, is this want to homogenize and a color blindness, because that's how, in my perspective, white folks were like, let's get comfortable with all these differences we can't even comprehend, never mind define. So let's just put it into we're all the same. And while I agree that we are all human, we all have feelings, want to live in community, want similar qualities of life, I actually push back on that because I find that oppressive to me. To me, it's important to acknowledge the different histories that we bring with us, to acknowledge our different ancestors, the different structural implications of being who we are in this society, right? To say that we're all the same on a grand scale, and to have that applied to us as children, which was very much my experience, as a hope to kind of equalize us, just lets everybody who has the privileges of comfort to kind of sit there, and you're not allowed to talk about your struggles because it kind of breaks apart this unity. So for me, I think it's really important to be also working with youth here in the Bay, trying to empower them and empower the next generation to say, we bring all of these things with us. It actually makes us stronger. We can really be the full pieces of who we are. And that's not antithetical to anything other than being used as a tool to actually speak out and to be able to embrace all the parts of yourself. So I just wanted to bring that up because I find a lot of power in talking about the political identity and identity and the richnesses of our heritage.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that made me think about, the phrase of, I don't see color, people that were saying that, like, I don't see your color. And I'm like, you don't see my hair, you don't see my color. Like, I want you to see. I mean, there's no shame, because to me that was a part of white supremacy, where it was like, you are all the same, but it's like, I see your color and you should see my color. Like, and we, embrace the differences. And so I think that's something that, I have heard a lot from, friends as we go through this kind of anti-racism education, on the fact that, saying that you don't see color is not always exactly what people are asking of you. We want to be embraced and to see us as we see ourselves, whatever that may be for us. This is fascinating. We're almost at time, so I have one more question for you guys. So I want to kind of wrap on this one. And really, as we talk about, being right now in the present moment, we can't not stop and look towards the future, right? So my question for you guys today is, what are some of your hopes for Ireland, for the diaspora in general, that you would like to see to come to fruition in regards to some of the topics we've covered today? And I will give that first to Eoin. Why don't you take that?
Yeah, it's I suppose at the most basic level, you want to see a more inclusive Ireland and a more open Ireland. I think there's I'm not living there obviously at the minute, but there's definitely been some tensions there over the last year, and some violence as a result of that. So I suppose you want to see that ironed out straight away. I think there's a lot of work to do in Ireland. I think definitely during the whole Black Lives Matters movement this year, I had a lot of people reach out to me and apologise for stuff that they may have said in the past, and asking me, is this offensive? Is that offensive? And people were defending themselves like, I'm not racist. And the point I keep going back to people in Ireland is look at how we treat travellers and I suppose people with heritage, because it's dog awful, and it's not a million miles off segregation. And the example is that if you were sitting in the fanciest restaurant you go to, and a table of travellers walked in and sat down beside you, how would you feel, or how would you react? And well, most people admit it, I can guarantee you, their answer would have been quite negative. So I think we need to work on, I suppose, we're the nation of 100,000 welcomes, and we really need to represent that. We need to remember our history of how many people went around the globe and sought work. So I think that's one thing I'd like to see, just more compassion, more welcoming, more empathy, more integration of culture. And then I suppose growing up for me in Ireland, those were two major role models who I looked like, and they were Phil Lynott and Paul McGrath, both superstars and really well respected in their areas of entertainment. But I'd love to see some faces in other areas for kids growing up to look up to, whether it be academia or policy, or in any area. But I just think we need to show, like, Ireland's a very diverse place now, and that needs to start being represented in the broader media and the country, how we portray ourselves.
Absolutely. Great point about representation, and I couldn't agree more with you with that. Axa, why don't you take that from your perspective? What are some of your hopes?
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. I love that one. I love that word, representation. Represent, it's such a powerful word. And so my hope is for more range. The more we have, the better. The range of the Black, brown, global majority experience and the Irish experience within that, the more we can show that through the arts particularly, the better it is for everyone. This is not just for us. This is for the white kids. This is for everyone. The more variety we have. Otherwise, it's not good. So that I'm connecting hope with range, representation, and range in the future.
Yeah, I love that. Range. I love that. That's a great one. Nadia, how about you? What are some of your hopes?
The same to what you both just said. I think also really hoping that as Ireland becomes more multicultural and as us in the diaspora also rebuild connections back home, I really hope that bringing everything that we are means that Ireland will also support all the pieces of who we are. So to me, it's important. I'm Irish. I'm proud to be that. I hope to go back and visit my family soon when the pandemic allows. I also want Ireland to be able to support the other part of my family who cannot travel, who are trapped in colonial violence, and be able to stand up and really advocate for oppressed people around the world. We know that history, being Irish, is really important. We often claim it. I would like that to be active and really advocating for justice globally and at home, like you said, Eoin, around traveler discrimination and discrimination against same-sex marriage and other things like that. It's important to be able to really make the world that we're talking about and make that cohesive.
I love that, and thank you for speaking up on behalf of recognizing some of the issues that we need to talk about in order to kind of push forward and get uncomfortable in order to foster change. Christian, how about you? What are some of your hopes?
Yeah, I think that, at least in the United States, I think the branding of Ireland as this place where there are a bunch of leprechauns with four-leaf clovers in their pocket who drink Guinness all the time. I really kind of think my hope is that the
Oh no, did we lose Christian?
country continues to kind of embrace.
Oh, you're back.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, you cut off for a little bit.
So to reshape. Yeah, I was saying just the idea that the country is more than four-leaf clovers, leprechauns, and Guinness beer, right? The idea that the multiculturalism exists and the embrace of that and the promotion of that to the masses in such a way that continues to encourage people to visit and or live. Ireland, it's perhaps one of the most globalized countries in the world. Their innovation is there. There's people there. There's technology there. There's so much there to embrace in terms of the living experience, right? And certainly the access that you have to other countries and on and on. It's a beautiful country in and of itself. But then everything that it offers, I think it makes it all the more compelling. But I think what it offers is often oversimplified in a way, or maybe that needs to be modernized in such a way that it reaches out to cultures that maybe are unfamiliar with Ireland for.
Oops, a little bit of a connection issue. Christian, can you hear us? Yeah, because he's having a little bit of technical difficulty there. So, you can join us, Christian, and finish. That would be great. If not, we'll keep going because we're almost at time. Leon, why don't you give us some of your hopes? Thanks, Christian.
Yeah, sure. So I think it's been summed up really well by everyone on the panel so far. Eoin, I feel like you're like nearly reading off my notes here because you pretty much said everything that I wanted to say. The piece around 100,000 welcomes and stuff like that is so important. Ultimately, for Ireland, I'd love to see Ireland become more inclusive, more engaging with the different, peoples that we have here. I'd love to see us really challenge racism in our country because it is unfortunately still quite prevalent, and we're still having conversations around, does it exist or not? When it does, it exists. So we need to move. We need to
rip that Band-Aid off.
Absolutely, and get working on it. That piece around culture is so important, and I feel like Irish people are nearly protective of culture, and they're like, well, no, we don't want to share it with anyone because it's been under threat for so long and so many years, and it was oppressed for so long. But I think we need to look at it in the opposite way. The British tried to stamp out Irish culture by stopping people participating in it. So if you do the opposite, if you open it up, if you welcome people into it, it will only grow. If you really want the Irish culture to continue to grow around the world, you need to open it. And I feel like we've done that for so long. But now in Ireland, I feel like we're slowly starting to shut off. Whereas we need to do the opposite. We need to, open ourselves up and welcome people into our culture. That piece around representation as well, I do want to touch on it because it is huge. It's so important that your functions within society are reflective of the people that are in it. Like your police force, politicians, it's so important that we see that representation in our society, or else the divides between those functions and communities will only grow. And those are challenges that we're seeing in Ireland at the moment and that we're working on. So yeah, my hopes for that would be my hopes for Ireland as a country. My hopes for the diaspora is that we continue conversations like this, that we we continue to meet as groups of people of Irish diaspora who may not have white skin, and because I feel like we're often excluded from the conversation of Irishness. So it's important that we continue to have these conversations and and grow. So those would be my thoughts. Yeah.
That's brilliant. And I think I'll just add to that. I think, again, as a marketer, I think that representation is so important, but even more so, I think it's like the inclusivity. So I would like for Ireland, to really start to understand that, that diverse fabric of amazingness that we've all described today, and really start to portray that more. And it isn't always just picking, the curly haired person and putting them in an ad and calling it a day. It's making sure that their voices are being listened to, and like you said, Leon, people are actually having conversations, with us, and continue to expand on that story. My hope for today is that everybody enjoyed today's panel. I wanted to say a thank you to everybody on this panel that gave up their time, and gave up their presence, and really, honestly shared their story. I think that everybody's story is so pertinent and important to us continuing to have these conversations. I want to thank Lorraine for actually putting this together. And there's a special a man that has had a huge impact, and probably one of the reasons that we're all having this conversation, if we really are honest. And that is Jude Hughes, who is one of the oldest and youngest, but I give them both, people of mixed race heritage in Ireland. It's his birthday tomorrow, and so we're going to give him a big shout out for his birthday. We want to say thank you to you, Jude. In honor of our event that we've been going on for the last couple of days, we want to encourage you guys to really share your photos on the Facebook page for I Am Irish, of what it means to you guys, of what your ancestry means. And we want to say thank you for joining us. Continue to have these conversations in your own circles. Continue to have these conversations outside of your circles. And we wish you all a good evening wherever you guys are around the globe. Thank you from I Am Irish. Have a good night.
See you later.
Thank you for tuning in to Irish Roots. Irish Roots is a completely volunteer-led festival. If you can donate, please do. For more information and to see what else is happening, jump over to our website. It's www.iamirish.org. From all of us at I Am Irish, Gurav Mila Mahagut.